Hi, I'm Paul Byrne, president of Razoyo, and today we're talking about our own website, which is a little bit different than what we normally were just talking about clients, but we just upgraded the Razoyo.com website from using Hugo to using Hugo plus CloudCannon, and made some different changes to the website that I thought folks would find interesting. And I have here the team that was responsible for this major upgrade of our website. And I'll just let everybody introduce themselves. So maybe Emily, Cameron, and then Holden.
I'm Emily Height. I own the Height of Media. Not only do we do social media marketing and marketing for Razoyo, but we also helped with the content and front end design of this website.
I'm Cameron Points. I'm one of the project managers here at Razoyo, and I help the marketing team with whatever they need.
My name's Holden Kavanaugh. I'm a developer at Razoyo.
Awesome. Hey, thanks everybody. So before we go into kind of what changed, let me just give a quick history of our website. So we've always had a website, and I think our first website was a Drupal website. And then at some point we migrated to WordPress. And I believe that was at Emily's suggestion because it was easier for her team to work with that. But we started seeing some limitations. And then also there was quite a bit of maintenance along with that, just to keep everything up to speed, keep it secure. And it required a fair amount of resources for the kind of website we have, which is pretty straightforward because our home website is basically content only. And then because we're developers, we decided to try something a little bit different to kind of overcome some of those. And that was to build our website with Hugo. And Hugo's a static website generator, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a minute. But it allowed us to create pages, submit them to Git, and maintain a repository of the code, and then deploy with code only. And that worked for a while, but it had some downsides, including we weren't able to do effective search on the website, and it made it really difficult for Emily's team to update content. They always had to go through a developer. And then finally, we decided it was time to redo our website, the look, the design, etc. And we decided to redo the back end as well. And we've come to our current setup. And so Holden, would you like to kind of say how that is set up, and what were some of the technical decisions we had to make to get there?
Yeah, sure. So to start, we use Hugo as our main static site generator framework, CloudCannon connected as our content management system, Tailwind for styling, Flowbyte for HTML templates, and then Bookshop as our interactive component system.
Great. Great. And this is all still a static website, but what makes it different from the Hugo setup that we had before?
Well, the main difference here would be the inclusion of CloudCannon. This makes it really easy in the future for non-developers to go in, make changes, manage our content. We have a lot of components built out that makes that really easy for them, and just overall more sustainable for the future.
And Holden, as a developer, what was your experience working with CloudCannon and integrating that with the Hugo system?
Yeah, well, it started for me by creating the Hugo website, getting the main functions working there, and then came a lot of configuration with CloudCannon, you know, making changes, connecting things there, and then going back and forth, checking, giving all of the features that the marketing team would like.
Okay, great. And as the person responsible for implementing the design, what was your experience with this new setup, and as compared to prior setups we've had?
Yeah, so compared to the previous WordPress site, which we were concerned about security and slowness, right? It was just a very heavy setup overall. And I think you guys had it for some period of time, the WordPress site, and there was a lot of lack of consistencies between pages and blog posts. And so when we initially migrated that over to Hugo, it was all, developer. We just kind of handed along designs and we went with that. But with this particular iteration, it was kind of a blend of the best of both worlds, right? So, we took big elements that we knew we could kind of put on multiple pages, and we really built out the back end to our advantage. So, in comparison to other platforms from where we came, I think we're definitely at an advantage because we needed developers in the past to help us put on all of the marketing content. And so, we've certainly sped up our process, our internal process for releasing content and updating the website on a reasonable basis. And in comparison to other platforms, I think that there was a little bit more setup time involved in this particular project. However, we did have the advantage of being able to customize it exactly to our liking, which took some time to figure out what the best configuration would be between my team, Halden, Cameron, and anyone else who may be involved on the website at some point. So, overall, it's been a great experience. And the customization, like Halden said, we're setting ourselves up for success in the future.
Right. Yeah. And I think, aside from the technology itself, I think the way that the team approached the templating process from really kind of, outside in, and making sure along the way that whenever, a change was made, do we consider this for the whole website? And just kind of tightening things up. I think, that project management approach was positive as well. But you've worked on other websites like Wix and WordPress, etc. Like, how was this? How would you compare and contrast the CloudCannon / Hugo setup to those?
So, I think that there's a lot out of the box that comes with a WordPress or a Wix. It's very drag and drop friendly. However, when you try to get into any complex functionality, you are still looking at, communicating with a developer to make those things happen. So there's kind of a disadvantage. The other aspect of CloudCannon that's great is that we did the work up front to customize it so that we could be using it, as we choose, right? Not as everybody else may choose, right? So the out of the box solution is different because it's what we created it to be. So we did a lot of kind of backwards thinking of, okay, what are we going to need, maybe in a year from now, and kind of backing into those things, which ultimately WordPress, Wix, those solutions build that out. But when you go to customize them, there's not much options available once you get developers involved, right?
Right. Yeah. I think one of the big temptations of WordPress is that you choose a theme and you're like, oh, I really like this theme. And maybe you put it through its paces, etc. But then inevitably you're going to get to a point where you want to customize something on that theme.
And then God forbid it updates, right? And then it breaks. And you constantly have to have a developer on staff to be helping you through those breaks and through those updates, or, you're at square one. So we kind of, framed out our CloudCannon approach to kind of prevent anything like that from occurring. I will say the other advantage is that WordPress is actually pretty messy on the back end, right? You get clients in there, you get a team in there that's not experienced, and they're kind of confused. It's very all over the place. And so with CloudCannon, it's actually very straightforward. And the process that we have, to go to preview and then to ultimately production is pretty straightforward. Honestly, way better than many of the WordPress sites that I've seen. So
great. Yeah, I'm really happy with it. With the results and so forth. But tell me, here you kind of had to work hand in hand with a developer to get things up, and the site's been, I think, released for maybe almost 2 months now, or a month and a half, something like that. And so compare like the build phase with now the content update phase, and how is that different from what you were experiencing before, or what you might experience with other systems?
Right. So, just plain and simple, our process previous to this website iteration was we'd create a Google Doc with the blog content, and then our team would go in and tweak it, and we would, put images in there, and we would link to the images where they're saved in Drive or where they're saved, and try to put some formatting notes in there for whatever developer is going to get their hands on this to get it up to the website. And ultimately, it's hard because a developer isn't always on standby for us. They're working on client work, right? So it's hard to always get somebody, when we need these time sensitive blogs to go up. We're talking about hot topics, things that are, trendy or current events. And we need these things up typically a day or two later, and a week or two is just not going to cut it. So ultimately now, with the new process, we're not waiting for a developer, because we set the site up to allow the content team to go in and be able to create drafts, be able to create, everything in there. And then everybody on the team can go in and preview it before it goes live, make sure it looks good, review it, add pictures, we can add it all directly in there. And then it gets a stamp of approval before going to production. So ultimately it has cut likely 2 weeks from every blog post, from draft to production. So, I mean, as far as our process is concerned, it's a lot more simple from a content perspective.
Yeah, that's great. Part of our objective as a team was we wanted to be more nimble, but we also wanted a high degree of flexibility, and at the same time consistency. And a lot of times that's a really difficult combination to get. I feel like we've really achieved it, because I can move much more quickly. My typical time for creating a page now is really just an hour or so, and it's ready to go, or at least it's ready for your team to add graphics, etc. And it's also allowed us to move something out very quickly, as you mentioned, and then we can follow up, and have a longer term version of it that has, a nicer banner, or maybe we change out some of the images or what have you, because we're able to go in and just easily edit just about everything. I'm going to turn my attention to you, Cameron. What was your experience on this versus some of the other systems we work on, say like Magento or BigCommerce, or some of these, some of our e-commerce sites, from a project management perspective, how would you compare it?
From a project management perspective, I would say it was kind of similar in the fact that Halden and we worked with sprints, and we worked with Emily to get the requirements. But I would say it was different because when we went to the QA process, we would QA it and then send it to Emily, and Emily would say, hey, this is kind of what I need, but I also need more. So it was developing what Emily would need in her team, so they can actually, create blogs and content for the website. So that was a little different compared to e-commerce, some of the e-commerce projects we've worked on.
Sure. And so compared to the, I guess, from a project management organizational perspective, was there anything special that you had to do, or anything unique that you had to do for this? Or, was it more complex, less complex than a typical project that you're working on?
That's a good question. I think we did it a little different. We, in order to get the requirements from Emily, we would create a spreadsheet and kind of keep track of what she needed from us. And then from there, we would put it into a ticket for Halden to work in.
Okay, so slightly different process, but overall, it sounds like you're using Jira. We're tracking issues. We're looking for bugs, all that sort of stuff.
Yep, pretty similar.
Okay, cool. So Halden, we mentioned a static site generator. What is a static site generator and what does it do?
Yeah, so a static site generator is a tool for generating an entire static site. Instead of dynamically rendering pages like WordPress or other CMS do, what Hugo does is it will compile every single page on build, and that allows it to be served to the users extremely fast. And yeah, that's the main definition.
Okay. So like kind of going back to, when I started working on the web, which was before you were born, was, we would create HTML files for pages and we'd put them on a server and we'd organize those into folders. And then we would go in and kind of edit the HTML and or JavaScript, what messy JavaScript there was at the time. And that was that was how we edited websites. That's how a lot of website editing was done. Now, of course, there were systems to build them on the fly like we have now, but for the most part, that was kind of it. So Hugo it's almost like it goes back to that original methodology, except it's the computer's doing it all for you. And so everything is pre-rendered and plopped onto the server so that it's very quick and very responsive to go through. Now, one of the things that's different that people might find shocking is that we had no database. There's no database associated with this. And that's one of the things that's associated with a static site is you're not really inputting, you're not storing data to render pages. So you don't need a database. And yet we're able to incorporate search on the site. So how did that work, Alden?
Yeah, so search was one of the first hurdles that I overcame developing. Traditionally, with a search, be it Algolia or something like that, you would index your database to create an object that you can then perform the search against. While there are ways to achieve that with a static site, it's a little bit more involved, and we wanted to go for a more straightforward route. And that's when I found a service called Lunar Search, which is unique because rather than indexing a database or just accepting an index that you give it, it can actually parse all pages on your site. And so what happens on our website is all of the pages are parsed, it creates an object to search from, and then all on the user's browser, the search is performed. So there's no burden on our servers or anything like that. It's all on the user's end. And yeah, that was a pretty good solution to our problem. It's pretty quick. And yeah.
Yeah, I was amazed a couple things on that. One is the amount of search that we could actually do. Because you can imagine if all the search data is held in the user's browser, you would think, oh, that's going to be a huge web page or what have you. But it's really not. It's not a huge object. And it's extremely quick. And at some point, if we had a massive website and we started having, client accounts, et cetera, stored in there, we would have to incorporate a database. And at that point, we would probably move the search over to the database. But for now, and for the foreseeable future, this is an extremely performant result. So I've been really, really happy with the Lunar Search. And I think, overall, what we want to consider as we're putting together our website, and if you are in the process of designing your own, you probably want to make a couple of considerations. So one is you might need two websites. So if you have an application, a web application that is providing value to your users and your visitors that needs, a lot of heavy computation or is tying together a lot of APIs, et cetera, on the back end, then you're going to probably do a custom build of that, or you're going to use some sort of system for that. But for your marketing content, you really don't need that kind of system. And it's easy enough to tie things together, either on the server or, using proxies or something along those lines, where you can create a seamless experience and nobody will know that you're not using the same application to build your website as you are to build your marketing content out. And so I think that's, that's one thing that maybe breaks a few stereotypes for folks out there. The other thing is, you may be able to get by with less than you think. And less is always more in the context of the web. Performance, speed, etc. They gain a lot from simplicity. So I think that's, one thing you want to have in mind as you're building out your website. And because these decisions can be somewhat difficult at times, we've actually started putting together a system to help folks make these decisions and to plan for their projects. It's called Prototype to Production. And you can go there on the Razoyo site. It's also linked to in the footer if you just go to razoyo.com. So I would encourage you to take a visit to that if you're a product manager or a product owner of any kind, and you've got a project coming up. I would encourage you to go through that process. We implemented that as part of this build on our side, and I think we had really, really great results. And I think we can help you do the same, and mostly on your own. So visit our site, take a look at it. And thanks again, team. Great job on the website, and looking forward to our next project together.